Psalm 121. Shila malo sesai nayalori me'agin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim v'haaretz. Al yitei lamot raglecha, al yonum shomerecha. Hine lo yanum v'lo yishon, shomer Yisroel. Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilecha, al yad yeminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakeka, v'yoreach balayla. Adonai yishmorcha mikora, yishmor es nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeisecha uvoecha, me'ata v'yad olam. I will lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? The source of my help is the Lord, creator of heaven and earth. He will not let you falter. Your guardian does not slumber. Surely the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He is at your right hand to protect you. The Lord, your keeper, gives shelter. The sun will not smite you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will guard you from all harm. The Lord will preserve your soul. He will guard your going and coming from this time forth and forever.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Michael Silverstein, and it is my privilege to co-chair this year's Yom HaShoah ceremony with Helen Cashton. We would like to thank the Jewish Federation, the Holocaust Education and Community Relations Program Director, Sarah Walters, and the dedicated members of the steering committee for the Center for Holocaust Awareness and Information, also known as CHAI. Rochester has a long and rich tradition of commemorating Yom HaShoah. I can remember as a young boy in the 1970s standing in the courtyard of the JCC for some of the earliest services. Since then, the service has grown to include hundreds of people sitting in the JCC ballroom year after year. In fact, God willing, we'll be back in that same ballroom next year. Jewish communities that are much larger than ours often do not get the tremendous response that we do for our Yom HaShoah service. We have tried to give back and remember our survivors and the loved ones that they lost during the Shoah. However, we all know that the survivors have given much more back to the community than we have ever given to them. A shining example of this is Simon Braitman, a pillar of the community who we've recently lost. Simon's personal story is far too impressive and complicated for me to do justice in this setting. I urge everyone to go to rochesterholocaustsurvivors.org and read and listen to his testimony. On a superficial level, he was 15 when the war ended and he was liberated. His mother, his brother, his sister, and many other family members were murdered. In 1947, Simon immigrated to the United States. He went to college, served in the US military, and eventually co-founded an internationally recognized company here in Rochester, New York. He would go on to live a full life that included a loving marriage, children, and grandchildren. Like many survivors in the Rochester area, Simon would go into local classrooms and talk to students about his wartime experiences. It's inarguable that he is an American success story. And yet, the most basic element of his story is he survived. The reason he was able to demonstrate his humanity and wisdom over the course of his life is he survived. How many lives were taken before they had a chance to be an entrepreneur, a scientist, a doctor, an artist, an educator? We will never know. Let us strive tonight to try to comprehend what was stripped from the world and lost forever. Tonight, we are joined by our keynote speaker, Rachel Cerati. Rachel is an award-winning photographer, writer, educator, and producer. Her work explores the intergenerational impact of migration and memory. She currently works as an audio producer and digital storyteller with USC Shoah Foundation. In 2019, Rachel released her first podcast, We Share the Same Sky. It was the first ever narrative podcast based on a Holocaust survivor's testimony and tells the story of her decade-long journey to retrace her grandmother's war story. It is now being taught in high school classrooms around the world. Her forthcoming memoir by the same name will be published in the fall of 2021. After the sudden loss of her young husband in 2016, Rachel began Welcome to Widowhood, an ongoing portrait series that tells the stories of women under 40 who have lost their partners. She continues to tell her own grief story on Instagram with hashtag #NowAWidow, In 2017, Rachel was the subject of an award-winning multimedia series produced by WBUR, Boston's NPR station, titled Beyond Sides of History. She holds a degree in communications from Temple University and is an alumnus of the Rothberg International School at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. She has completed educator seminars with Yad Vashem and Facing History and Ourselves. Rachel shares her story worldwide to communities of all ages and backgrounds. We are proud to welcome to the Rochester community, Rachel Cerati.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel Cerati, and I am a photographer, a writer, an educator, and an audio producer. But more importantly, I am the granddaughter of a fierce woman who is named Hannah Dubova, who was a Holocaust survivor. Back in 2009, 2010, I was a very discontent college student who could not figure out where in the world I wanted to be, except for I knew I wanted to be a photojournalist. So I was moving all around, always with a camera in hand. And like any young storyteller is told, I was advised to pick a story and start a blog. So one story that I'd always been interested in was my grandmother's. I knew that she was a Holocaust survivor. It was not hidden from any of us as we grew up. It was just part of our identity. It was part of who we were. My grandmother was very vocal. She spoke at schools and museums. She spoke at community centers to people young and old, and she was such a gifted storyteller in the sense that she knew how to adjust the way she told her story depending on her audience. She knew what details to include to speak and to touch the lives of young kids, and she knew how to frame her story to impact people of her own generation. So I thought it would be interesting and, more importantly, give me an opportunity to have some one-on-one time with my grandmother if I asked her to tell me her story. So I kind of remember it like it was yesterday. It was summer 2009, July, and I was at her apartment complex's pool just outside of Philadelphia when I asked her to tell me her story, and she gave me this nudge and was like, no, you've heard it before. I was like, yeah, I know, but I'd like to hear it as you would tell it to me, your granddaughter. And so that was when we started these storytelling sessions. And I really didn't know what I was going to do with my grandmother's story at the time. I just thought that it would be really nice to have as a granddaughter one day would be her recorded testimony. So fast forward like 12 years now, my grandmother's story has become the backbone of my personal life and the center of my professional life. It has led me all around the world. I have had the distinct privilege and pleasure of walking into the homes of strangers whose family histories intersected with my own history. And I've gotten to live with them and document their lives and explore the way that the stories of World War II have been passed from one generation to the next. And it's the more I learn about the Holocaust and the more I understand the complexities and how these different stories live on in different people, the more questions I have and the more curiosities I have. Memory is a very fascinating thing that we all hold on to and we all inherit from our past generations, and that's really a lot of what my work has focused on over the past many years. So today, to begin this commemoration of Yom HaShoah, I wanted to read a part of my forthcoming book, which is about my grandmother's story. It's called We Share the Same Sky, and for those who might have heard the podcast, it's by the same name. The podcast came out 2 years ago and was produced for Shoah Foundation, and now I'm very excited that the memoir is coming out this summer and it's now available for pre-order. So I thought before I get to spend time live in person or digitally in person with your community tomorrow evening, that I would share a little bit of how I got into my grandmother's story and how it essentially took over my life. So here it goes. On October 8th, 2010, Mutti passed away. We all call my grandmother Mutti. It means mother in German. There were no tubes or sterile walls. There were no doctors dictating visiting hours or nurses checking her vitals. Hannah died at home, a place she had fought so many times over to create for herself. Her body lay peacefully. It was the first time I touched a dead body, but I didn't cry. My memory is in black and white. I remember her skin being cold and soft. I took her hand and kissed it. Surrounding her were pictures, her writings, and the delicate pages that proved her past. It was everything that I, unknowingly at the time, would come to wrap my world around. In the years after her death, I uncovered the most beautiful archive of her life. It wasn't a hidden archive or a secret one. It was just what she had left behind. It was everything she had told me, curated and edited. There were preserved albums and hundreds of photographs dating back to the 1920s. There were letters waiting to be translated, journals, diaries, deportation and immigration papers. There were pieces of creative writing from various stages of her life, some marked up with line edits. The archive was seemingly endless. Every time I thought I had found the last box, I discovered another. There were repeated stories, some written at age 14 and others at age 80. There were anecdotes and memories that contradicted each other, bringing the question of memory into all of her stories. There were childhood report cards and souvenirs from her cross-country travels. There were confessions of love, secrets intended to stay private, and flashbacks never intended to be understood. She had written about being a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, and a cousin, a friend, a student, and a dedicated member of her youth group. She was a strong-willed teen, a refugee, and an orphan. She was a survivor and a victim, a wanderer, and someone who dreamed of home. She was a hopeful immigrant and a forced emigrant. She was an urban dweller and a farmer. She was a pioneer and a storyteller. She was a Czech child, a stateless teen, and an American wife. She was a traveler, an explorer, a teacher, and a student. She spoke 6 languages. She was a divorcee to one and a reignited flame to another. And for other men, she was the one who got away. She was a bride, a mother, and a grandmother, a young person searching for her future, and an elderly person watching her grandchildren search for theirs. I became obsessed with this material, adopting it as my own and taking it with me when I moved back to Boston after graduating from college. My methods of preserving my grandmother's story would have appalled any professional archivist. There were documents and photographs that should have been handled in a clean environment and stored in boxes that were waterproof and fire-resistant and let in no light. These were delicate, worn pieces of paper, and yet here I was, sitting on my bedroom floor, moving them from one pile to another and storing them in manila folders with little to no protection. I digitized and organized it all, plucking it from the past and placing it into my present. I learned my grandmother's handwriting. She used the same shaky cursive to caption her photographs as she did to write letters to friends, while titles were always written in block capitals. I scanned every photograph. I retyped every diary. Every word went from her fingertips to my own. I paid close attention to the names and places I found in the archive. Those details were found on the backs of photographs, on official documents, within the pages of journals, and on stamped letters sent from one country to another. I listed the names chronologically and took note of how she had gotten from one place to another and which train station she had stopped at. When my grandmother started telling me her story, she said she had felt like she was going on a big adventure. That's what her archive felt like as well. I began buying books about World War II and the Holocaust. It is the most well-documented genocide from the side of the perpetrators and the victims. I learned the basic facts quickly. World War II began on September 1st, 1939, when the Nazis invaded Poland from the west. A few weeks after that, the Soviet Union invaded from the east. The persecution of the Jews started far before that. I taught myself about the roots of anti-Semitism and the rise of the Nazis. It felt like a puzzle. The history books helped me understand my grandmother's story, and my grandmother's story helped me understand the history books. During these years of obsession, I shared an apartment in Boston with 2 friends. I was stringing my rent together by working various jobs, primarily through photography, international travel programs, and teaching. My future felt like it was on the edge of exciting, but not yet burdened. My roommates and I hung white lights around the living room and lit candles while listening to Bob Marley, Kendrick Lamar, and Rudimental. We played games, made friends with each other's friends, and went to concerts. It was that time in life when we were all making bold decisions for ourselves, but not the kind that had to do with kids and marriage. We were all just figuring it out. Barack Obama was president and change was happening. Life was moving and love was flowing. With each new photograph I scanned or a diary entry I transcribed, I became more and more committed to my grandmother's story. It had been almost 4 years since Hannah had died, and I'd spent too many years buried in her story to not let it take me somewhere. So I decided I would literally follow in her footprints. I would live in every country she had lived in. I would travel the way she had. I would track down all the characters from her journals, all the names listed in her letters and documents. And most importantly, I would try to find the people who had saved her life. In her diary, my grandmother called the Holocaust an incomprehensible black page of history. I wanted to know what happens when you turn the page. So once again, that's a part of my memoir, We Share the Same Sky, which tells the story of my decade-long journey to retrace my grandmother's war story. And tomorrow night, I'll be meeting with all of you, your community, and I've had the chance to meet some of your students so far earlier in March to share with you a bit about what it was like to step into my grandmother's story for years, like really through much of my 20s, and had the chance to live with many of the descendants of people who saved her life, and really feel her story at the bones in Europe. And so tomorrow will be a visual journey into that, and we'll travel together through Central Europe and Scandinavia and talk about what is the reverberations and the echoes of World War II in our lives today, and why are times like this time of the year when we stop to think and to commemorate Yom HaShoah, why is it so important for us to do individually and also as a community? So with that, I hope everyone has a lovely evening, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, and thank you for having me this evening.
Candlelighting is a traditional component of the Jewish remembrance rituals. Our 6 candles commemorate the murder of the 6 million Jews during the Holocaust.
Candle for Torah, Rabbi Avi Kalibnik. Candle for Israel, Eva Abrams, Bonnie Abrams, and Lou Rich. Candle for Peace and Justice, Warren Heilbronner. Candle for Tikkun Olam, Josephine Breitman, Blanche Fenster, and Andrea Fenster. Candle for Compassion, Leah Malik. Candle for Memory, the family of Lily Haber.
We Remember Them by Sylvan Kamens and Rabbi Jack Reamer. At the rising sun and at its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now part of us as we remember them. Together we remember the survivors who have passed since April of 2020. Sarah Kuttner, Hirsch Bornstein, Lily Haber, Hilda Rudnick, Yeva Reutbert, Hans Menko, Simon Breitman, and we also remember Rabbi Shaya Kalimnik. If we've omitted a name, please take a moment and recite it now.
At this time, we say the memorial prayer, the Kel Maleh. Just to note, for many years growing up, I remember this was sung, it was recited by my father of blessed memory, Rabbi Kalimnik. Have in mind his memory as the words that I will be saying were words that he would say every year, special text of the Kel Maleh, including many of the concentration camps for our Kedoshim, where they suffered, where they perished. We remember them today. Kel Molei Rachamim Shochein B'Amromim Hametzei Menucha Nechona Al Kanvei HaShechina Mibemahalos Kedoshim Utahorim Kizorakim Hazirim Es Nishmoseyem Shel Sheish Meyos Rivavos Alfei Yisrael Anoshim V'Noshim Yiladim V'Yilados Yes Nishmos Shel 6 million Yehudim Acheinu B'nei Yisrael HaKadoshim V'Atahorim Shenaflu B'dei HaRoitzchim V'nishvechu Damam B'Auschwitz Majdanek Treblinka Dachau Buchenwald Bergen-Belsen Warsaw Ghetto Lodge V'shar machanos shamaves birupa Shnehergo v'shenitbechu v'shenechneku v'shenikberu chayim bidei mivlotsos hatzarim begalus eroipa Kulam kedoshim utarim Bohem goinim v'tzadikim arzelavonu v'adirei HaTorah Anshei midos v'anshei emunim Tinokos shel beis Rabban B'gan Eden tehei Menuchasam Yilochein b'arachamim yastirein b'seiseh kenafav yolamim V'yitzror b'tzror ha'chaim es nishmoseihem Almai unachal asam V'yanuchu b'shalom Al mishkevoseihem V'nohoi maromen.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. B'agalau v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei d'kudasha barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Damiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru, amen.
We continue now with our prayer for peace. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu. May it be your will, eternal our God and God of our ancestors, that we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world. The nation will not threaten nation, and humankind will not again know war. For all who live on earth shall realize we have not come into being to hate or to destroy. We've come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion. Fulfill the promise as it is written. I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you. I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war. Let love and justice flow like a mighty stream. Let peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. Oseh shalom b'mramav, huya aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the high heavens make peace for us, for all Israel, and for all who inhabit the earth, as we join together in saying, Amen.
Good evening, I'm Chazan Randy Levine. Tonight I'll be performing a piece called L'chol ish yesh shem. Each man has a name, which expresses the very simple Jewish belief that each person, each individual, is considered as though they are him or herself an entire universe. This poem was written originally by the famous poet Zelda, set to music by Hanan Yovel, and then popularized by the Israeli pop artist Chava Alberstein. Tonight I'll be performing it with local Rochester musicians, Ken Luck on guitar, Jeremy Grace on the cello, and Jonathan Allentoff on the viola. L'chol ish yesh shem. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatan lo Elohim, v'natnu lo aviv ve'imo. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo komato, b'ofen chiyucho, v'natan lo ha'arig. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo heharim, v'natnu lo ketalav. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo hamazalot, v'natnu lo shchinav. L'chol ish yesh shem, l'chol ish yesh L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo chatatav, v'natna lo kmiato. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo sonav, v'natna lo ahavato. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo chagav, v'natna lo melachto. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatnu lo kfot hashana, v'natan lo yigrono. L'chol ish yesh shem, l'chol ish yesh L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatan lo Elohim, v'natnu lo aviv ve'imo. L'chol ish yesh shem, shenatan lo hayam, v'natan lo Please join me in the singing of our national anthem. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homiya ulefateh mizrach kadima ayin letzion Sophia. Od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnod alpayim, liot am chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim, liot am chofshi be'artzenu, Eretz Zion Yerushalayim.
Du gehst dem letzten Weg, Himmeln bleien verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, Zweiter Poik tun unser Trut mit seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show, Zweiter Poik tun unser Trut mit seinen Do. Von grünen Pammenland bis weißen Land von Schnee, wir kommen an mit unser Pein, mit unser Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, spritzt von unser Blut. Spritzen wird dort unser Guvre, unser Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, spritzt von unser Blut. Spritzen wird dort unser Guvre, unser Mut. Es wird dem Morgensun bagilden uns dem Hain. Und den Ecken wird verschwinden mit dem Feind. Noch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajo. Wir Parol so gehen durchs Lied von dort zu dort. Noch versammeln wird die Sonne in dem Kajo. Wir Parol so gehen durchs Lied von dort zu dort. Das Lied geschrieben ist mit Blut und nicht mit Blei. Es ist nicht kein Lied von a Vogel auf der Frei. Das hat der Volksfischen fallen dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ne Garnis in der Hand. Das hat der Volksfischen fallen dicke Wind. Das Lied gesungen mit ne Garnis in der Hand. Kein Mal, als du gehst dem letzten Weg. Himmeln weihen, verstellen neue Tag. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heute tun unser Trott mit seinen Do. Kommen wird noch unser ausgebänkte Show. Es wird ab heute tun unser Trott mit seinen